When we first got onto the pathway for diagnosis from my daughter, we were referred to social services. The challenging behaviours that she was exhibiting at school were becoming an issue, and that means they had to do MASH reports. Now, don't get me wrong, MASH reports are really, really important. We've got to be able to protect our kids, and that's what social services are there for. But our experience with social services was a real challenge because we experienced what we all know as parent blame, which basically meant that my daughter's challenging behaviors that she was exhibiting at school were then being blamed on her home environment. So it's in that vein that I have with me today a qualified social worker who is actually still employed as a social worker, does that work, also has an autistic family. This lady has chosen to remain anonymous. This is so that she can speak freely and actually challenge the issues that are being faced by social workers, but also being faced by parents and carers. You won't see her face, but you will hear her voice and you'll hear her side of things. I think this should be a very interesting conversation. So welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. And it's going to be an interesting conversation, and I really appreciate it. Tell me a bit about what you do. What sort of role are you in within social services?
For the last 10 years, I have worked as a social worker in a transitions team, and that team sits across or between children's and adult social care. The purpose of that team is, in theory, to assess young people as they're approaching 18 and to check whether they've got any entitlement under the Care Act to services once they turn 18. I love my job, I really do. I'm 26 years qualified, which, when I say it, literally terrifies me. I also feel really, really proud that I'm still doing this job, and I never really know whether to call it a job or a profession or what. I don't know I still haven't decided where I sit on that, but I never ever ever don't appreciate what I can do in a family's or young person's life or situation, and how privileged I am to be hearing and experiencing what they've been through, what they need, just to try and make the whole thing a whole little bit better. And sometimes, if I am at the end of my tether with my job, and it's very rarely is it the people or the families, it's usually my employer, well, it is my employer who drives me to distraction. Sometimes, if, say, for instance, if I'm sent out to see somebody that I don't know, go and see a family on duty, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, look, I haven't got time for this. I just can't, I can't do this today. I haven't got the headspace. I haven't got the time. What about the families on my list? All that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, when I get there and I've kind of began to unpick whatever it was that I've been sent out to do, I come out of that house and I think I am bloody glad it was me that went. It's really special. It is really special, and I feel very lucky. But over and over and over again, I endlessly see families and young people, if the young person's been looked after by the local authority, who are just backed into impossible corners. Don't get me wrong, there are clearly incompetent individuals who work for the local authority or the NHS or whoever, or schools. Maybe it's not even about being incompetent, it's just that they've just not got the right personality,
Yeah.
or they've not got the right way of engaging with people, or just kind of like meeting people in a way that works for them. But the systems, whether that's health, education, social care, any of that, I just don't think that they're fit for purpose. They do not offer, in my view, families, young people, what they need. And I sometimes think about like my family situation, and I think we need emotional support, we need practical support, and we need a little bit of nurturing. And I don't actually think that is any different for a family with a child who is neurodiverse, or a child with a physical disability. It's just that those you need those things in a very, well, not even a that unique a package. It just needs to be done on a really humane meaningful way, and systems just can't do that. I don't know why.
Well, it's the question that I think is on everyone's lips, isn't it? Is that thing of why isn't it fit for purpose? I want to unravel that a bit. Taking it back to, you explained there, when you got into social work as your career choices, your vocation, whatever you're calling. My belief is that I don't think anyone gets into these lines of work because they want to be horrible,
No.
want to make people's lives harder. In fact, I think that generally the reason for getting into it is the complete opposite. Well, I'm guessing that was the case for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of fell into it really, which is a bit strange. I'd gone off travelling because I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. And when I came back, I started doing some volunteer work for a local organisation. And there was somebody who was on placement for this organisation who was doing a social work training. And if I'm honest, I come from a very privileged background. There's no doubt about it. I don't think I would have even known that there was a job called social worker.
Yeah.
When I was at university, we used to talk about we would discuss what people's motivation was for going into doing your social work training, and was it about Mr. or Mrs. Middle Class coming in and fixing the wayward, or was it from personal experience and that kind of thing? It was a real mishmash for me, and I think that the first team that I went to work in had got four social workers who were like 25, 30 years into their career. And I absolutely credit them for moulding and shaping me in terms of the way that I approach my job and families and people. So again, I feel very lucky to have gone into that team. I feel like, sort of like 25 years in, I feel confident that I can go into a family home or go and see, an individual person. Obviously, we only do what the law tells us we can do or we can't do. We can't support somebody if they're not Care Act eligible. If we're having to explore court, and I'm talking about like adult court protection, then we can only do that in certain circumstances, and it really is like last resort type situations. Working in the team that I'm in, I will generally go and see, like, if I think about going to see a family where a young person is still living with their parents and still in education, usually, I will go and I will say to them, what is it that you want to happen at 18? What do you want as a parent and as the young person? And let's see if we can get that to happen. And I'm always very realistic about, local authority budgets and sort of like the practicality of some things that they might come up with. But a lot of the time, people either say, or you get the sense that that is the first time in perhaps a very long time that somebody has said to them, what is it that you need out of this interaction? What is it that you need from me to enable your life to be all right, to be as you want it to be? And I've got loads of really powerful memories and sort of like feelings and experiences from some families that I've been to. I remember one of the first young families I went to go and see when I was in this team. It's been in this team about 10 years. And I went to go and see this mum and her daughter hadn't got a diagnosis purely because of her age, but everything that was written or said basically said that this young woman had got schizophrenia. But they couldn't officially diagnose her until she was 18 because whatever.
It's the way yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't allowed. This mum was really quite confrontational, which was fine. And she said to me, she said, I've got videos to show you. I've got these videos to show you of my daughter screaming, pulling at her hair, grabbing at her face. And I said to her, I don't need to see them. If you show me if you want me to watch them, but you don't need to show me those. I believe you.
Yeah.
What? She was literally like agog,
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because I think there is this disbelief, and we've launched. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff today, but we launched in with this with the idea that parent blame is so prevalent in the system. It was definitely our experience, and I mean, I've spoken to so many families. So the volunteer work I do with groups like Parental Minds and the PDA Society and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I come into contact with a lot of people when social services become involved, and I guess this is on the more child services side that it really is where it hits it for us. But it's the first instinct every time. I have a person I work closely with who's got a son. It's basically her stepson, but her partner died. The son was taken into care, but she's been fighting to try and get him back for a good long time now. I've actually interviewed her. I'll put the link in the description for that particular episode. But the first thing that comes into play every time is this element of blame. You get sent on parenting courses and all that kind of stuff. It seems to me there's a lack of knowledge within the social services system of what it's actually like to parent and care for somebody who is neurodivergent to these levels where social services have to get brought in. I've been doing a lot of work with educators and professionals in that arena. We discussed the fact that in the education degree that you do for 3 years, in that whole course, only one day is dedicated to SEND education.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous because if you're a teacher now, you're a SEND teacher, you're going to have SEND kids in your class.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that so many cases come up, and it feels like the post office scandal in a way to me, in that there's these systems that need to be in place that aren't working properly, and families are getting damaged. What's your take on that?
I think that, well, you've clearly hit the nail on the head. And I guess personally, it was at the end of COVID, we self-referred to our local like early help type service. They're all called different things, aren't they, in different places? But
Half the problem as well, like the chasing around the different elements of the system and the different supports that's supposed to be available, and as much as anything, it's buck passing because
yeah, no, definitely, yeah. Although we had a really decent worker, I mean, the long and the short of it was because my son, who was the autism diagnosis, he just virtually broke in COVID because of just all the usual reasons why that was so horrific for so many people, but particularly him. But some of his behaviour was just it was really hard to manage, really hard to manage. And I'm not saying I'm like some sort of expert, but I've got a good idea. Do you know what I mean? I've got a decent idea. Even though she had been a parent, it was like she'd got no idea the suggestions that they were making were completely impractical in a family environment.
yes,
It might have worked if it was me and him one to one, but it certainly didn't work when it was me as the only adult with three children and a job.
yeah,
Not a cat and mouse chance. Do you know? I remember her coming round, and it was a really lovely thing for her to say. Like she said, "I am here to help you, and I'm going to help you through this." And I remember thinking, thank God you're here. By the end of 6 weeks, I was saying anything I could to kind of like wrap up the intervention because all I could think was is you are adding layers of extra shit for me to do, frankly, and I can't.
that opens up a line of conversation that I really wanted you to get into. I mean, from our perspective, we had the social service involved because my daughter's a PDA, which is anyone's pathological demand avoidance. It's a profile on the autistic spectrum. You can check out the links in the description, which will explain PDA. My daughter's method for dealing with that, and seems to be pretty common with PDAs, is a very aggressive meltdown, and it puts others at risk. Exactly what you're talking about. It's not something that you can understand unless you've kind of lived in that environment.
Yeah.
And you see so often when you're talking with professionals, and I think it was something when our initial social worker came in, and this ties into something that you said earlier as well, which I think really would be good to focus on, is that she was the wrong person for the wrong job. It was all about the status of her position, actually.
Yeah.
I say that with the understanding that obviously there's a bias from my perspective because we went through hell. And but it just contributed exactly what you said. There's so many more problems to our situation because my wife was in the process of being diagnosed as being bipolar. My daughter was getting on the pathway for being diagnosed as autistic with PDA. I was working. We had this family unit that was really struggling. Rather than be something that was supportive and helped us, we ended up being put onto child protection simply because this particular individual had latched onto all the wrong things.
Yeah.
Just got onto parent blame.
Yeah.
And it was all my wife's fault because of her being bipolar. And it's like, it couldn't have been further from the truth. And there's stuff I can't talk about because it's
Yeah.
business, but there was, so much that went on in that period. And we felt like we were living in a fishbowl. Suddenly everything was being watched, and it added a layer of stress and complexity to an already stressful and complex situation.
Yeah.
Just made life so much harder. Coming back to what we're saying today is like the wrong person in the wrong job. Are there systems in place which actually take a step back? I do work as a peer support worker.
Yeah.
Through Parental Minds. It's fantastic. And one of the things that they sort of really focus upon is the need there for our own support as well. So having supervisions and being able to say, I found this particular thing really challenging, or I'm struggling in this area, so that they can look for opportunities for training and they can look for opportunities to broaden the knowledge. Does anything like that exist within the social care system? Because it seems to me that you're somebody who's got through this and you're still very passionate about the side of things. But I think I see a lot of social workers that after X amount of years get so burnt out because of the bureaucracy and the systems that are in place. Is there anything within the social services system that's protecting social workers, but also making sure that they are still right for the job?
There's not. It's twisted, really. It is twisted that we train, we do this job, and we're supposed to be helping and supporting and making situations better, or at least making them safe. And yet we are pushed to our limit. Like, it's a really toxic relationship, and it's a really toxic, almost like waterfall, like a trickle down.
Yeah.
I think our employer generally treats us terribly. I can't tell you the times that I've been blamed for all sorts of things that were not my fault. People get blamed for stuff, they get pushed into corners over doing things that you, like individually, like personally, that is not the right thing to do. But if you really stand your ground, you can lose your job over it. Like, your employer can ultimately say, if you will not do basically what we tell you to do, then you can be pushed out, managed out, all that kind of thing.
I think we live in a blame culture. And when I say that, I mean, it's looking for who's wrong, not what's wrong.
Yeah, definitely. But that is then what happens to parents, to families.
Exactly.
Because it just gets passed down. When you're at university, and you have to remember as well, a lot of local authorities now, like when I started 25 odd years ago, everybody that was employed in a social work team, apart from like the admin staff, were qualified social workers.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I would say 75% of the workforce in a social work team is not qualified. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't got phenomenal skills, but a lot of the kind of like what I sort of like call old-fashioned unpicking of what you learn at university, most of those people in the social work team now aren't doing that, and they're not thinking about power dynamics, and they're not thinking about who's got the control in this situation, and am I using my control in a crappy way towards this person or this family, or am I reflecting on what I'm doing and thinking, oh, is that the right thing to actually do, or is that something that I'm being forced to do by my employer?
Yeah.
It's almost like that analysis and that kind of like self-determining of you as the professional is being crushed out of social work. That's where it's gone very, very wrong, really.
It's so refreshing to hear this perspective. You're reminding me that Scrubs, the TV show, there's an episode with Dick Van Dyke in it where he's got to a point where he's not able to keep up with the advances in medicine anymore.
Your osteoporotic patients aren't on bisphosphonate. Your diabetics aren't on ACE inhibitors. Doug, a lot of your treatments are pretty out of date.
Come on, Bob. Guys like us, we're set in our ways.
Well, this is not an age thing, Doug. Hell, these days, if you've been out of med school 5 years, half of what you learned is obsolete. Why do you think I spend every other weekend at a seminar in some two-star hotel ballroom that still stinks of last night's prom vomit? I do it because I have to keep up.
Look, Bob, I don't have the energy for all that stuff.
We've got a system which is archaic, actually. Like we said before, at the beginning of this, we were talking, and it's like there's nothing in place that trains people in current understandings of neurodiversity, of special educational needs and learning disabilities.
No.
The sad thing is the people with the most experience don't have a knowledge of actually what's going on these days and the more open understandings that we have of autism, of neurodiversity, ADHD, of all these different forms of neurodiversity.
Yeah.
Not being trained in it. I spoke to Marie Gensels a while back now after she did the Don't Exclude Me TV show, where she'd been in schools helping, and we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
She spends a lot of time trying to keep herself up to date with the different elements and understandings of neurodiversity, because it's just not there. I do work with the Tess Sen show and with Rise for Disability, and it's all about we're trying to educate educators, but I think it brings it into this field of it's the professionals that are having such an impact. And if you can't go into a situation with an understanding, and what I really liked about when you spoke to me initially and when I reached out, you said that and you talked about it already, you've got a neurodivergent family yourself, so you've got not unique, but certainly a rarefied situation you've learned from the inside. So I'm guessing the people you work with really do appreciate your support. How do we change that? Like, I've been talking with colleagues from the group I'm on Facebook, and it is like there's so much talk goes into things, but how do we actually take this situation where we know we have a system that's not fit for purpose, that is archaic, outdated, and causing harm as a result, because there aren't enough people like yourself in there? How do we change that? How do we actually make the change?
I don't know. I really don't know. I used to find myself getting literally exhausted, like mentally, I guess physically, emotionally exhausted by telling commissioners, or we'd have these focus groups and we'd have these working groups for this, that, and the other, and you'd go on them and you'd say the same thing. And then I realised, like, 10 years later, I'm still saying the same thing, and I'm still nothing's changed. And so it gets exhausting, as it does, like parenting in that sort of toxic situation with those relationships with social care and whoever else, education. For me, in order to stay sane and to also keep my job and kind of like keep my little family afloat and hopefully do a decent job when I'm at work, I have to focus on what can I do, where can I affect change and stay sane. And for me, I know that the greatest influence that I can have is just on that sort of like really quite small circle.
Yeah. So
the families that I work with, my peers, and maybe a bit bigger within the organisation. If I could, write a little script of what social care and health and education would look like. It's like going back to the old Sure Start centres. They always felt like solid places where families were welcome and wanted, and where families could go and could genuinely and safely say, this is something I'm really struggling with. How can you help us? I'm sure not everybody's experience of them is quite like that, but if there was small pods of specialist support, and that be, like I said earlier, no family needs, there's not many, I can't think of a family, mine included, that doesn't just need, those few simple things, which is emotional support, practical support, nurturing, and safety. Whether that's, you've always got food on your table, that your bills are paid, that your house is clean, safe, all those sorts of things. A little pod of everybody that you could possibly need, whether that's an educational psychologist, a social worker, somebody who's going to help you figure out your money, somewhere where you can get some food if you've not got any.
This is what we're supposed to have with early help. But again, I don't know, it feels to me from our experiences, but also from what I see in other people's lives, that the problem we have is that this toxicity that you're talking about filters through from government in a big way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
And so what we have is a system that's so divided into different areas. The problem I see is that the left hand isn't talking to the right hand.
yeah,
We're supposed to have things like early help, which is supposed to be these pods, but people trying to access early help aren't able to do so.
yeah,
They have huge waiting lists that result from, I think what gets forgotten, and I think this is something that's such an important point to make right now. The reason you do your job, or the reason a lot of social workers do their job, the reason I do what I do, the reason we're all doing what we do in this environment is that we care for our kids.
yeah,
It's about that person at the end of the day. My family's mental health as a whole really matters to how we're going to be able to parent effectively and how we're going to support our kids. The old adage, if the masks drop down in the plane, they say secure your own mask first because you don't want to be incapacitated. And yet we have a system that seems to, I know so many families that have broken up because of the pressures that are on them. I'm surprised we made it through.
yeah.
We were in that particular situation because it was such an intensely stressful time. Like you say, it just added more problems. I guess what I want to get to is, I'm going to take it back this way. When you take a step back, what's the biggest problem you see from the inside?
I think it's the fact that local authorities are such political organisations. There's so much sort of like posturing once you get to like a head of service type level. They'll say they've got like sight of the front line and that, that they want the services to work for the families, for the people, whatever. But actually all they're bothered about really is the performance indicators and reporting back to whoever they have to report back to in the local authority.
I think the difficulty, and this is where my empathy comes in for people especially for social workers. People forget you see some awful stuff as well as do some amazing good.
Yeah.
That's got to carry with you.
Yeah.
You see families that are really struggling and you know what's needed, but your hands are bound by the bureaucracy and by the systems that are in place. And like you say, you're doing this or you've got no job and you're not going to be able to help anyone else. Let's be honest. Like you say, when it becomes so politicized, it takes away politicians, like you say, they're not interested in anything other than getting re-elected, making things appear great when you do a news story or when it's on paper and people have to come to vote. It really saddens me because I think what we're doing more and more, especially in this country at the moment, we seem to be losing our grasp on humanity in the sense of
absolutely
human beings at the end of this. Social workers are human beings. We forget that as parents. Usually at that point, it's only either you've given up, you're a fighter and you've gone, you're frozen, or completely gone into fight mode. And so you get this very combative relationship that exists from the get-go, and you break through that. We've got to remember that the person coming into our home is a human being as well. That reciprocation, I think, would really help, but it doesn't come from government. It doesn't come from local authorities because all they're worried about is getting to the next election.
Yeah. And, with us, we're under so much pressure as workers to kind of like be looking at how much money we're spending on each person in their support plan, that feels like it's the only focus. Completely understand that there is only so much money to go around and we have to kind of spread it out in the fairest way, and people who are most in need and all that kind of thing. This is the bit that would get me in trouble. I just kind of like let it wash over my head. I think, do you know what? I am literally going to do everything that all the things that I know that I need to say in a funding panel to get this family the money or the support that they need. I'm doing it. I don't care. I don't care that the local authority is apparently on the edge of bankruptcy, because I just care about getting the best for the people that I'm involved with at the time. And they wouldn't like that at all.
But I mean, thank goodness there's people like you in there doing that.
There's quite a lot. I mean, I guess like birds of a feather flock together and that kind of thing. But there are quite a few of us, I promise.
I absolutely believe that. I think it comes down to an element of communication that gets missed in the EHCPs with schools. Now, I learned that about 6 months ago, that if a school puts forward an EHCP, they've got to cover the first £6,000 before they get any funding towards an EHCP.
I didn't know that.
Well, there you go. See, I mean, this is it. It's not common knowledge. So schools are not telling anyone this because it's sort of that sense of, I don't know if we're supposed to say anything about it.
Yeah.
Parents don't know about it and carers don't know about it. we're just sort of stuck in. So why is it so hard to get an EHCP? Actually, there's a simple answer. Schools can't afford them. That's not being communicated. And you've got this same thing, I think, with people like yourself who want to see the system change, want to see good done, are actually in this job for all the right reasons and none of the wrong ones.
Yeah.
But your hands are tied in so many ways. And I think until that becomes more public knowledge, is why doing this interview is just so important. The more we can get this information out there, that actually the CAMS workers, they're as frustrated as we are. The amount of CAMS workers I've spoken to are tearing their hair out because all they want to do is help, and yet
Yeah.
because their hands are tied. And it's the same thing. It's got to come from the top. We've got to stop attacking the social workers and actually, it's like, let's talk to people like yourself. It all comes down to, I think the best thing they do is keep everyone at arm's length, because if it's the division, I don't have to deal with this because they're just going to fight amongst themselves.
Yeah.
If those two warring factions were to join forces and turn and face the real enemy, I think it would be huge.
And I think that's the thing that is really important, that we I think, like I said to you at some point, we point our finger of blame in the wrong direction. Not just social work, but health professionals too, and education. We say, if the family are doing this wrong, the family are wrong, they're not doing what we're telling them to do. And that is an easier direction to point the finger of blame, rather than saying, actually, the waiting list for CAMS is 2 years. So how are they going to survive that? Or the waiting list to see a community paediatrician for exploring ADHD diagnosis is 4 years. It's stuff like that if we really rattled a different cage, we might be in a different position. But it is so hard, from my perspective, as a parent and also an employee within the system. You're just knackered, absolutely just knackered. When somebody at school suddenly said to me about so I've got two children in primary school. One has an official autism diagnosis. And when our Senko, who is a lovely, lovely woman, said to me, "Oh, what do you think about going to the doctor and asking the GP to put your other child on the waiting list for seeing the community paediatrician to explore ADHD because the ed psych saw him and she was this, that, and the other?" All I could think was, no, I can't go through that again. I can't. I'm knackered. I haven't got time.
We had a very similar situation in that we started realizing my son's an ADHD. We ended up going private simply because it just cut the waiting times out, because by the time he'd be diagnosed, he'd be going into high school, and that's where he's really going to need.
Yeah.
That brings it back to the other thing, doesn't it? So much comes back to money and funding, and there's just not enough of it.
No, it's just really tricky. And it does boggle my brain why so many professionals just don't or can't or won't allow themselves to kind of like see the reality of families. Sometimes I don't know if that's maybe because it's too painful for them and it's a way of protecting yourself, or whether it kind of like pushes your buttons and triggers stuff in yourself. And again, it's self-protective. If we did have decent therapy, decent supervision, then if we could perhaps unpick those things as the workers involved, maybe we'd be more capable or more willing to sort of face it head on a bit more in the direct work.
It almost brings us back to the initial points that we were making, is that there's no training going on and there's no support for you guys. And it horrifies me that the things that you have to see, you kind of just have to cope with on your own. There's nothing in place that is supporting you to deal with those things. If I put myself in your shoes or another social worker's shoes who's had to see the dark side of things, if you've seen something that really is down to the parents are doing something very wrong, that's going to add some trauma to your experience, but it's also going to shape the way you deal with the next family.
Definitely.
It's going to be painted with the brush that I've seen what can happen when this happens. And so being able to, like you say, have a therapy or a supervision or something that allows you guys, police have it.
Yeah.
Ambulance, paramedics, doctors, they all have it. Why the hell aren't social workers included?
I did have, I mean, there's been lots of things, but last year there was 2 really, really horrific experiences that I went through with work, and I absolutely know it traumatized me, and I was off work for a little while. And work then, I was happy to see occupational health, saw them, and they made a recommendation that I have some tailored therapy. what I was experiencing happened as a direct result of doing my job. The work declined, just said, no, we can't do that. We can't do that for our employee who's been off work for whatever, 4 weeks. And then not only did they say, no, we can't provide you with that therapy that our occupational health have recommended, they then took me through a disciplinary for having 4 weeks off work. There you go. That's what you're faced with. So you kind of like, it's toxic. It is a toxic place to work.
I'm stunned that you're still able to be so positively influential within it because of everything you just told me there.
Yeah.
Me is just truly horrifying.
It is horrifying. It's a really toxic relationship. That's the only way I can describe it. And a bit like the post office scandal, when people watched that, honestly, me and a colleague had seen that without saying to each other the next day. We both kind of said, oh, did you watch that on telly last night? She said, oh, yeah. I said, do you know what I thought? All I could think was, our system, and can people get in it and like change things that I might have typed or written? And you just get a bit paranoid, really. But these things happen, don't they? Yeah.
To wrap this particular episode up, because so you guys watching, I'm going to be speaking with this fine young lady again. We're going to talk about things like transition, where it's going from child services to adult services.
Yeah.
But to wrap this one up, where we're really looking at the problems in the system, I think it's something that we've got to start being prepared to. Let's write to politicians. Let's write to our MP. Let's start making a noise, because our social workers are there because they want to help. But they're, as we, the last half hour has really shown, the systems in place aren't fit for purpose. And what's actually happening, and this is what I think I didn't realize to quite the level, the impact it has on you personally as a social worker, but as a human being behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How can we expect our social workers not to be burnt out and just doing the job rather than caring about the people at the other end of it, if the systems aren't in place for them to be nurtured and cared for as well?
Yeah. But and I agree.
Well, look, I think we've come to the point where I think for this episode we're going to wrap it up. There's so much there to unpick. If you've got any experiences of difficulties with social services or good stories as well, I want to hear both. Please do put them in the comments, because it makes a real difference, and it's something that we want to see the change. And what we've got somebody here who, from the inside, wants to see those changes taking place.
And if there was any questions from parents or young people that there was something that I could potentially, guide, support with, then within reason, I'm really happy to do that.
Fantastic. So pop them in the comments. I will make sure any and all questions are directed through as well. I want to thank you so much for your honesty and your openness, but just for being prepared to take this step. I think it's very brave and courageous. So thank you.
No, thank you. As a parent and as a social worker, I look at some families and I think I've got no idea how you get through the day. And I think that the commitment, most of us are committed to our children to a greater or lesser degree. Sometimes I could literally run off from mine, but the commitment that parents show to their children literally blows my mind. It blows my mind. And that's why I want to keep, that's why I do what I do, really, because I just think someone's got to prop somebody else up sometimes, haven't they?
There's nothing wrong with needing support when you need it.
Yeah.
We will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, please do stay safe.